Hi, everyone. It looks like we're all logging in here, and I'm just confirming with Dee and I guess others that our chair, Ashby, Judge Ashby, is not with us yet. Is that correct? Or might he be joining us?
I'm looking at Angie, but I think yes, we expect him at some point. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Do you think we should wait, Angie, or?
Yes, let me just check momentarily, but yes, I am expecting him.
All right, thanks.
Oh, okay, great. I was prepared, but happy to wait.
Looks like we have a quorum now, Nick.
Great, and equally, if not more importantly, we have Judge Ashby joining us. I was just on standby to chair if needed, and I am not needed, so I am handing the gavel over.
Nick, you are essential, Nick. To say that you are not needed, it's shocking to hear. Know your importance and your self-worth. It's nice seeing everybody. I'm sorry that I'm a little bit late and I'm super casual. I have been traveling since midnight. Sometimes I wonder why I returned, but I have. And so we will start the meeting. Let's see. Do we have any? I don't see any members of the public joining us. And we will move to the March minutes. Has anyone had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes, I read the minutes carefully. I'll make the motion to approve them. And in my motion, I just want to thank Angie. It was a really robust discussion, and Angie just did a really remarkable job, I thought, in capturing our discussion. So thank you.
Excellent. Motion by Nick Lelak.
I
Do we have a second?
Stevie.
DV seconds. Any opposition? All right, March minutes are approved. Thank you very much. And no members of the public participating. So we will move on to item number 4, JRI supplemental grant funds. And let's see, we have Trevor. Trevor, good afternoon. How are you?
Doing well, Judge Ashby. Thank you.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen, everyone. Okay, so I'm here today to talk about a third round of funding with the Justice Reinvestment Program. And just as a reminder, we've already received 2 rounds of funding for Justice Reinvestment Funds, one being the formula grant and the other being the competitive grant. And let's see, back in March, they released a supplemental grant round application.
Trevor.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do you think that you are sharing a screen?
I do.
I don't see that you are.
Okay, let me redo this again.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dewey. How about now?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you, Dewey. So back in March, the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission released the third round of funding. It's referred to as the supplemental grant round of funding. They have an application that's due May 24th. Basically, there was $784,566 of unallocated funds for Justice Reinvestment Funding, and they're making those available to Oregon counties. They're making them available kind of in, they're asking everyone to submit applications that are for 100,000, for 75,000, for 50,000. So basically prioritize how you would spend the funding depending on how they break those up. So we have a grant application that we plan to submit. Here's some more information about those funds. So the focus for the supplemental grant is really on restoring programs or components that we previously either funded or that we previously applied for and did not receive funding through the JRP process, or JRI Justice Reinvestment Funding. So this can look back several bienniums. So they're just looking at funding things that we've already requested funds for or that were previously funded and providing funds to help supplement those services. So for Deschutes County Community Justice, we are seeking LIPSIC's approval to apply for programs that were part of our 23-25 competitive application. And basically what that will support is an administrative analyst position that really focuses on housing and administration of our housing funds. The goal would be to really utilize that person kind of as a subject matter expert to provide the services for those housing. We have 12 contracted beds through Pfeiffer and Associates, and then we have 7 contracted beds through Bethlehem Inn. And so managing those is kind of like hotel management at times. And so utilizing the funds to help support that position that provides that kind of coordination for those services. And that was part of our 23-25 competitive application. And then the other part of those funds would be used to provide contracted mentor services. And this would really really focus on gender specific mentor and workshop services. So as we know, and kind of how we'd applied for funds, we really are looking at aiming and supporting mentor services for clients in our JRP program that identify as women. And so we recently relaunched gender responsive services for our clients on supervision. And these funds would be provided to help support a contract that would provide specific mentorship and workshop services for those clients. The organization we're looking at working with is it's named Imperfectly, and it's a organization that really focuses on providing kind of reentry and recovery services, especially for women that are kind of grappling with addiction, homelessness, and other barriers. And so we'd work with that organization to provide those mentor services for that population. It's a hands-on training model that really focuses on a group setting as well as individual mentorship, and they kind of work through with access to technology and reaching out to those individuals that they're working with. So those are the two. We'd previously requested funding for these in our 23-25 application. Because of the way that the competitive granting funds were, they only awarded partial funds for everyone that applied for competitive funds. So this would just be to provide some funding to supplement those services for the 23-25 biennium. What this looks like for a budget breakdown, if the request is for 100,000, it's 80,000 to support 0.5 administrative analyst FTE, and then 20,000 used to support the contract with the local nonprofit for mentorship and the workshop with women. If it was just 75,000, we would just reduce that down to just the FTE request. And if it's 50,000, we would reduce that down to just the FTE request, making it a portion of that FTE depending on how much funds we receive. As an FYI, 10% of any additional funds we receive will be distributed to our victim service agencies. And those percentages that are listed there on the slide are how we already have those allocated. So any additional funding that we receive would be distributed to those agencies based on those percentages. Any questions? And then what we need today for an action item is just a motion to approve the submission of the JRP supplemental grant application.
I so move.
And do we have a second?
I second.
Any opposition? All right, motion carries, Trevor. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll move on to item 5, House Bill 4002 and deflection programs. And I had the pleasure of joining the meeting. And if anybody forgot, shame on you, how talented Holly Harris is. Just attend a meeting where she's kind of running the show, and it was great. So Holly, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate those kind words. So here today to talk a little bit, just a high level overview of House Bill 4002, the specific parts of that bill that relate to the deflection program. I won't go into all the ins and outs of the entire House bill. There was quite a lot in it. And so I just kind of talk about just what deflection means for our community, what steps we've taken so far to address some of the legislation, and then where we're headed next. So as you know, House Bill 4002 created a new misdemeanor, Class U misdemeanor for possession of controlled substances, and was really intended just to offer a pathway to expungement or dismissal from those charges, otherwise known as kind of deflection from that. It's encouraging district attorneys and law enforcement to divert a person to a deflection program. It does not require it, but we have as you all know, our really wonderful partnerships with our law enforcement and district attorney's office, and have full support of those entities in order to pursue a pathway to deflection in our community. Next slide. So technically, the definition of deflection is a collaborative program between law enforcement and behavioral health systems that assist individuals who may have a substance use, behavioral health, or co-occurring disorder to create community-based pathways to treatment, recovery supports, housing, case management, or other services. When I first heard about deflection, it was not a term in behavioral health that we were used to. And so what I quickly learned is we've been doing a lot of deflection for years and years in Deschutes County through behavioral health. We were just calling it diversion. And in the criminal justice system, diversion is often means something just a tad bit different. And so that was a learning opportunity for me to understand that this really wasn't very far outside of our realm of what we already know how to do and what we've been doing for years, particularly as it relates to our stabilization center, our mobile crisis services, and many other parts of our system as a whole that are doing a lot of diversion work. And in fact, in the DA's office, the Goldilocks program, or what was then later deemed the Clean Slate program, is very much in line with what they're referring to as deflection in this context. Next slide. So just some high-level overviews. The Oregon Criminal Justice System is going to administer the grant through their Impacts program. So you all might remember years ago, I came before this group and asked to be an applicant for our Impacts grant program to help fund the Stabilization Center. So it's nice, we're already an Impacts grantee, Deschutes County Behavioral Health is. And this is really just a sub-program under that already existing grant program, which allowed CJC to really be able to very quickly roll out this new effort. And they did not have a lot of time to do it. So it was good that they already had a mechanism to do some of it. Counties, or if a county chooses to designate someone, are the convener and the applicant for the deflection program. And multiple programs can be submitted under one application, but it has to come through the county in some form or fashion. Again, it's administered by CJC, which, just as a side note, having worked with CJC for years on the Impacts program, they're a wonderful organization, and they're really, really easy to work with, very flexible, adaptable, common sense. And so it's been really great. I was excited to see that they were going to be involved in this program because it makes it a lot easier to administer. So the grant funds that can be used for deflection program expenses, so pretty high level stuff there. It can be used for law enforcement employees, deputy DAs, behavioral health treatment workers, including some behavioral health like mobile crisis and support services workers. Can be used for some workforce development efforts, capital construction, and planning, for which I'll get into in a minute about the first 50% is for counties who chose to be early adopters. And those were people that before the legislation passed, raised their hand and said, I like this legislation, we're going to do something along these lines. And if you did that and signed off, which Deschutes County did, because our DA and our law enforcement partners were supportive, as well as our Board of Commissioners, we were able to get 50% of the funding upfront and can use it for planning purposes. Feel free to interrupt too if any questions, if anybody has any. So the funding amounts, the total allocation for deflection for across the state was a little over 20 million. 9 million was allocated to a separate 9 million plus was allocated to CMHP for what kind of was already our existing deflection diversion services. Many of you know we've had a forensic diversion team within behavioral health for years that's contributed to a 60% reduction of recidivism for the last 8 years for the people they serve. So again, we called it diversion from the criminal justice system. It really fell in line with deflection. So they allocated some funding because we had never received the full amount of funding to do those services since we've had that program. Early adopters, like I mentioned, received 50% for Deschutes County. That was 378,000 and change. And they used a Measure 110 formula that when Measure 110 originally rolled out, there was a formula that was created to help fund SUD and behavioral health services as a result of those of that legislation. So they use that same formula to come up with the money that people were going to get for this. The funding is supposed to be in our hands by June 1st, and I think it's going to actually happen because they are moving fast, and we've already had our application approved, and we are just going through the logistics of contracting processes right now. We'll receive the other 50% once the longer application is complete. And I believe that, I don't have the exact date, but I think it's due sometime in May. So our total amount was 756,000 and change. And it is technically ending June 30th, 2025. So that was definitely something that gave everybody pause. But I think from what everybody's hearing and all the efforts that are being put into this, there's sort of everybody's expectation that this will continue, assuming that these deflection programs are in fact set up successfully. That is our hope for sure. So just to give you a sense of what all has occurred so far, March 7th, the session ended. March 18th, there was the Association of Oregon Counties and CJC Summit that helped try to explain what all happened in the short session as it relates to deflection. And then, you know, knowing the timelines around that time, we very quickly got a meeting together on April 5th, which is the one Judge Ashby was referring to, where we had about 25 attendees. So it was really robust attendance. Some of the partners included our district attorney's office, our courts, public defenders, Best Care, Ideal Options, all of our law enforcement entities were there. Representative Krupp even showed up and listened in, as well as behavioral health. And so I helped facilitate that meeting just to get it kicked off and try to figure out what we were going to do in Deschutes County around all this. The goal of the meeting was really to figure out what type of model we wanted. And I think, you know, there's deflection can happen at all sorts of parts and places in the system. It can happen really, really early before law enforcement's even involved, all the way to where law enforcement is issuing a citation and you're deflecting them from a court process. So there's lots of in between in that space. And I think our discussion was really, what do we want to do in Deschutes County to address this legislation and provide a deflection pathway? Also needed to very quickly define who the coordinating agency would be, the fiduciary, and the grant applicant. Donna.
Hey, Holly, how you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm wondering, you know, and it may be later on, but in the population that's included in here, will this include youth, or is this going to be just adults?
That's a great question. And I probably will let actually, because this has come up already, and it's not as, the juvenile system is always a little bit unique and complicated in its own way. So DB, do you want to talk about how juveniles fit into this deflection process?
I think it's kind of undetermined. Such a
Yeah.
great question, but being undetermined from the legislative perspective means I think we do still have flexibility and space to consider how we might want to make it work here. So I think we just need to add it into the conversations and see where that's going to go. So we're not prohibited by it, but it certainly wasn't built with it as its centerpiece.
Exactly.
I just wanted to make a pitch for, we're about to release an RFP for behavioral health through, which would be, you know, about ED boarding, homelessness, and SUD, but with a youth overarch on it. So while you guys are putting together the model and thinking about maybe there's some braided funding that could happen there.
That's amazing. I think there's a lot of interest in thinking of a way to incorporate youth into any opportunity to deflect them from the, you know, system in any way. And so, I think we have a lot of opportunities within behavioral health as well as juvenile justice to make a partnership like that work well. So definitely on the radar for sure. Thank you, Donna. Oh, next slide. So we did accomplish our goals in the meeting, which was great. And we're really all pretty aligned on the direction we wanted to go, which was, and I also learned something about the different models out there. So our group really was interested in creating what's called a law enforcement assisted diversion program, which is also known as LEAD. And what I learned about LEAD that I didn't know before I started all this is that there's lots of ways you can do a LEAD program. You can have a LEAD program that's run by a law enforcement agency. It can be embedded within the district attorney's office or within different law enforcement agencies, or it can be embedded and part of behavioral health too, in conjunction with all of those entities. And so there's a lot of ways you can tailor it and design it based on best practices that can align with where your community's at with this work. And so that was reassuring to me. And knowing all of the things that we had in place to do this work, how that was all going to work together. So the group asked that behavioral health be the coordinator of this. So we agreed. And so we will take the lead on kind of being the facilitator, the coordinator, hiring a position to be responsible for sort of the grant requirements, the facilitation of the meetings, the just help and program development. But this is very much a collaborative community process. This is not behavioral health deciding how it's going to be done. It has to have buy-in from all across the board. And so really we are just the convener and the coordinator of those efforts based on our partners' requests. And also our model will be, so essentially the way LEAD programs work is law enforcement's out in the community doing what they do, and they encounter somebody that now is charged with a deflection eligible crime. And so there's a lot that goes into that term, deflection eligible crime, but at a minimum, it's really this new possession charge that was created, this misdemeanor. And any of the lawyers, judges, or law enforcement in the room, feel free to correct anything I'm saying, because I'm still learning about all this as we go. But essentially they encounter somebody who is eligible for deflection. So they are able to offer it when it's appropriate. And then there will be somebody available to them 24/7 when appropriate to respond out to the scene if that's what's needed and indicated. And in our case, we have chosen to really tap into our behavioral health resource network. So this was the program that was created out of Measure 110 originally. And it includes, we're part of it, Best Care, Ideal Options, and a few other entities. But Best Care and Ideal Options really raised their hand and said, we want to be a part of this. We want to have providers that are recovery mentors, peer support specialists that can respond 24/7 to where an individual is that's being offered deflection and start to make that connection. And you all know how powerful that lived experience connection can be for individuals who are in this space. So starting it off that way and then offering a pathway to complete the program. And those are the details that I don't have today, because that's the work this group really has to do, is like, what does the rest of it look like after that? What does the program look like? What crimes are eligible for deflection pathways? And it can be more than just a substance use, a possession. It can be other types of crimes if that's what your community decides you want to do. So those are the sort of details that we didn't have to have worked out for our short form application, but that we'll need to think about really carefully as a group and design and develop as part of our program. Any questions on that? Because I know that's high level, but okay. So we were asked to, behavioral health was asked to be the grant applicant and the fiduciary. So we'll pass through the dollars to the entities to Best Care, Ideal Options, if that's who, ends up being the partners that still want to do this and needs to add staffing to their organizations. And we'll submit the grant application, which we will be submitting the grant application in May. I think I had the date wrong on that. It should have been April 22nd. And so right now we're currently in the contracting process, as I mentioned, and the longer detailed application will be due later in May. Next slide. And I can't see everybody's hand, so if there is a hand up or anything, feel free to just jump in. So our next steps on this is to obtain Board of County Commissioners approval to receive the grant. So we're in the process of that right now. I think I'm getting on the agenda to go before them to officially accept the short form, the first 50% of the funding, so they can hire the coordinator. That will be step one. Oregon Health and Science University has started what's called an ECHO program. They do these ECHO programs for lots of different topics, but they started one for deflection services, because they really recognize that there's a lot of best practices out there that people don't know about, because this is fairly newish for Oregon. And so they're taking the lead on creating this. It stands for Extension for Community Healthcare Outcomes. And right now it's weekly, but it goes for a couple of months, and it's really a panel of experts that help talk to you about all the different ways in which deflection can be offered in your community, best practices, all of that. So I'm attending that along with several other members. DA Gunnels is in there. We've got a couple of law enforcement entities in there. So it's a group of us that are part of this planning process are all trying to learn as much as we can about what is already in existence around this work that we can learn from. May 9th, which is Thursday, I believe, there is a House Bill 4002 implementation and training symposium that I think, and DA Gunnels, you can correct me. It's the DA's Association that's putting it on, isn't it, or at least an affiliation?
Yeah, we're one of the partners putting it on. There are a number of others.
Great. So that's going to really, I think, specifically highlight lead models heavily, and all the different ways I can do it. I'll be participating in a panel presentation on that to talk about from the behavioral health perspective. So that should really be an opportunity for us to learn a lot as well. And then our next planning group meeting is scheduled following that meeting on May 21st. And our goals will really be to work through all the details. So we have a lot of things to kind of comb through, figure out our data collection. What does it mean to be successful in a deflection program? What outcomes are we looking for? How are we going to ensure culturally and linguistically, services that are provided to all members of our community? We want to make sure that we're, not enhancing disparities through this process. So there's lots of work to be done and I think that for me, the biggest challenge that I see in this process, and it's a good problem to have, is that we have so much that we're building off of already. So we're, like I said, we're doing deflection and diversion work already. So how do we incorporate it and make sure we're not, that we're being efficient with our resources, that we're not, stepping on each other's toes, that it's all coordinated, and that we're getting all the right people into the right pathways of care. So those will be the challenges. Do we have referrals coming from stabilization, mobile crisis, burn provider? We've got so much infrastructure that we'll have to figure out, but it's a good problem to have. So I'm excited to work on it. And then we'll be working on eligibility, which crimes and things are eligible for this process, which obviously will be heavily influenced by our district attorney and our law enforcement partners on what they're thinking around that. And then we're hoping, I had to put in the short form application when we thought we might be ready. So I was like, fall. So I'm hoping that's because I think that's when the legislation goes into effect so I think we're trying to align with that and have it really up and running as soon as we're able to, but hopefully by the fall is the goal. So there's a lot of information. I did slides so that I would remember to track it all because it's a lot of details, but yeah, any questions?
All right, Holly, thank you very much.
I think Commissioner Chang had a question.
Oh, Commissioner Chang, good afternoon. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Holly, when you were first describing the funds, you talked about using the Measure 110 funding formula to determine Deschutes County's allocation. But I just want to make sure that I understand. This is not where these deflection programs are not being funded out of the Measure 110 funds. This is additional funding.
Correct. Thankfully, they did not remove any of the original funding that came out of the original Measure 110 reforms because those investments are just starting to take hold, quite frankly, between the staffing challenges and just everything else that went into that rollout of that. So that money remains. I mean, it's always, still somewhat year to year or biennium to biennium. But yes, this was additional money on top of that. So that was really wonderful to see.
That's great. Yeah, I could. And then, I mean, when you mentioned that the BHRN partners are going to be the ones providing the treatment services and trying to respond 24/7, I was worried. I want to make sure that they continue to get the BHRN money,
yep,
so that they can do that work. I mean, will they get additional funds or is this kind of like pairing up the BHRN Measure 110 monies with a kind of a purpose or a focus for them?
It's adding to the burn funding to enhance it, because essentially the burn partners, Ideal Options and Best Care, they were not funded to be able to provide 24/7 response out into the community. That was not the level of funding they received the first go around, but to to not include them in this work and to not have them as part of the response, it really would be kind of pulling away from what the burns were intended to do. So I think it's wonderful that we're signing away to really enhance the burn fund, the Measure 110 funding that already existed, and beef it up so that it can truly be integrated into the deflection work we're trying to do as a community. And I mean, they're really they have enormous amount of expertise in street outreach as it relates to just engaging people with substance use disorders. So it makes a lot of sense. We talked about whether or not we wanted, to use mobile crisis for this work or stabilization center. And I think there's a space certainly for all of those things in this work. But, the county staff are expensive. They are already overstretched and overworked and can barely meet the needs, of what we've already tasked and mandated to do. So to think about adding this whole extra layer of work solely on them didn't make a lot of sense either. So it's really a way for us to just utilize all the resources we have in our community to the best of our ability to get the most out of it.
And how do you think the remainder of the funds might be used? I mean, like, I'm not asking for like a detailed budget or anything, but
Good.
I mean, you're gonna need a coordinator, and then, what might be the other big components of funding allocation?
Yeah, I think we're gonna need, to have pass-through dollars to at least Best Care and Ideal Options to be able to beef up their staffing to do 24/7 response. And what they're gonna need for that, I'm gonna defer to them on. So I would imagine at least a couple of staff at least in each organization, maybe more. But again, having them be both nonprofits, that the money will go further in those areas to be able to get the staffing levels that they need. I think we'll be working with our DA partners, our law enforcement partners, to see whether there's a need within their organizations for data collection or staffing or anything like that to be able to pull this off. Chief Krantz, did you have something to add?
Sure, Chang. I mean, it's a good point. That's the unknown right now, is what is all this going to cost and how are we going to fund it? And particularly I think it really will depend on how we set it up and what the expectations are in the front end. Law enforcement is expensive. So as much as we can, and I've been a proponent in all these meetings of as minimal touches as possible for law enforcement, because we are the most expensive piece to this front end. So it doesn't require additional police officer positions specifically assigned to these type of roles, where we just do our job as typical, or we come across somebody in TCS, we write a citation, or so it's the function, and then we have a place to take that person to where it basically hands off to all the resources. If that's our involvement, then our cost is pretty minimal. If our involvement is much more involved and more touches and ongoing meetings and regulation and monitoring and that piece, then that's a lot more expensive piece. So really, I think a lot of it depends on where do we go from here and how does that get set up to determine what that future expense is.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember, $750-something thousand for the biennium. It's not a little amount of money, but it's not a huge amount of money either. So, and we have to think about things like, what data collection efforts we're going to need to pull off, but also, a lot of times, incentives and a place for, the big thing I'm really concerned about that, I'm hoping we can use some of these dollars too for is, where are we getting people the treatment that they need? What resources are we connecting them to? What housing options? Many of these folks are experiencing houselessness. What are there some shelter beds we can purchase as there's some creative ways in which we can make sure we have the supports in place to help get the people into recovery, which is really the whole goal of the entire thing, is to get people better. So how do we use some of the dollars to support those efforts too? I think I worry about using it too much for staffing because we don't really have a confirmation beyond June 30th of 2025. So that's scary to think about hiring a lot of staff when you don't have certainty around their future. Chief Van Meter, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Just to support Chief Krantz, through ECHO, I've had some statewide conversations, and just to sing Holly's praise is how far ahead Deschutes County is from the rest of the state with the stabilization center and the response team and what we're already doing in deflection. It's just a matter of giving support to the behavioral health crew and letting law enforcement do law enforcement stuff. But then we're way ahead of the rest of the state. Continue that success with what Holly has been doing with behavioral health. So I just wanted to give a little insight to some conversations that's going on around the state.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate that. Are there other questions? Well, great to see you all. It's been a little bit since I've been to this meeting, so I appreciate your time today.
Thanks,
Holly,
Holly.
thanks for your description. Anything else on that topic before we move on? All right, really quickly on item 6, courthouse expansion. The general contractor has started to break things and remove things. So AJ Tucker building is gone. And there is going to be a temporary entrance to the courthouse that is, will be there for 18 to 24 months or so. And that will be over on the west side of the building. It will be slightly north of the current entrance. And so that process started. And true to form, when you build or change things on a somewhat older historic site, you find things. And so outside of our jury room window, we saw the demolition team come across something that I think is cost savings quite a while ago was just buried, and like, hey, if we don't move it or dig it up, it'll never be a problem in this budget cycle. And that was like in the 1970s. I think it was ended up being a base, a huge base for a flagpole is what was eventually determined. But there was some scraping, mammoth shovels poking at it. People are on cell phones, and decisions need to be made about what this strange, potentially dangerous thing was. So anyway, they're working through that. I was gone for a while, and I got a photo that it had been broken up into rubble. The decision had been made that it was inert, and so we're moving forward with that process. Really excited about that. And Commissioner Chang, I'm going to put you on the spot here. There is an event on Monday. Is that right, at 1 p.m.? Would you mind sharing with the group what's happening then?
We're going to have a formal groundbreaking, which sounds like the ground has already been broken, but there'll be a groundbreaking type of ceremony. And I think it's okay to invite everybody from the LIPSIC and beyond to come to that event. Staff can tell me if that's not right, but it's going to be a moment to commemorate this really exciting expansion project, and looking forward to. I'm guessing there'll be people with shovels.
There will be people with shovels.
Ceremonially moving a pile of dirt.
We'll make sure that it's all safe underneath, and there will be no new discoveries. So I just wanted to thank the BOCC again and really so much community support from everyone who supported and recognized the need for additional judges in Deschutes and for an expanded facility. As a history buff, I love seeing the history of justice in Deschutes. It's all really on the same campus. If you look at the old jail up on top of the old courthouse and the different architectural styles, and we're just sliding south, and this will be somebody else's situation at some point, but the Board of County Commissioners really has had the vision to, I think, to set up the county long-term for an excellent justice facility and courthouse that will serve the community for many years to come. And those are not easy decisions. They come at the cost of these days interest rates and other capital projects that either are delayed or slowed down or don't happen. So, every choice has a consequence, and we really appreciate that support. So yeah, Monday at 1 o'clock. Any questions about item number 6? Maybe it'll take long enough so I don't have to talk about item number 7.
I guess the one other thing I'd like to say about that is we can all thank the property taxpayers of Deschutes County who will be servicing the debt to get this project done for the next 15 or 20 years. So
That's right. I mean, it is a huge commitment, through the BOCC of, hey, what's important to our community. And, obviously I'm a partisan on that issue, but the facility, I've always been confident that we have the right people in the room in terms of design team, general contractors, and that remains true. And so yeah, really excited to see this thing get done for the community. Moving on to item number 7, unrepresented persons update. So obviously this is a very serious and sobering topic for our community, certainly our justice community. You folks may have seen some news pieces about the unrepresented crisis. I'll give a little bit of background because not everybody lives in that space. So statewide and really nationwide, there's been a struggle to find adequate indigent defense counsel. So if most of the people who come into our criminal justice system cannot afford an attorney. And so the bar is fairly low in terms of, means to apply and qualify for an attorney. We have an individual at the courthouse, Rebecca Williams, who has done that. I think she's worked for OJD in our 11th district for in the teens, 17 years maybe. She's fantastic. And typically her role was to just say, hey, here's what you make, here are your assets, here's how you qualify. And we always had an attorney. And that has not been the case, like I said, statewide and nationwide. It's, like anything, more severe in certain places than others. These issues have been more acute in Jackson, Multnomah, and Marion counties. And for a whole host of reasons, I won't get into all of the details, but that issue has visited Deschutes very abruptly. And we have had, when I say we, the district attorney's office, Steve Gunnels, Mary Anderson, Representative Krupp, our criminal defense bar. We have 3 primary providers of indigent defense services. We have Deschutes Defenders, the Bend Attorney Group, and Atlas Law Group. We've been meeting collaboratively. We're going on probably 18 months, 24 months, just saying, hey, we have known that the ice that we were skating on was very, very thin. And recently with the Deschutes Defenders, they had several people who went on family medical leave, left for other career opportunities, all things that should be supported and are appropriate and great. But it did have, there's just no elasticity. There's no additional bandwidth which within the criminal defense bar to absorb that. It has also, and I couldn't speak to the numbers, seems to have occurred when we have just had a lot of major crimes. Measure 11 type offenses, we've had an unfortunate number, of course, of homicides. One is too many, but we've had way more than one. We have had a significant increase in luring minors, encouraging, online encouraging of child sex abuse and things of that nature. So, these are individuals who are at the deep end of the pool in terms of, criminal jeopardy and consequences. And of course, they're presumed innocent. Many of these people will appear, by video because they're being held in custody pursuant to a presiding judge's order that they be held until they see a judge. And so, as they await their, moment to, have their hearing with the judge, they complete an application, and we have not had attorneys to appoint to them. So what we did was I worked with Judge Bagley, who's our second most senior judge, to come up with a process to say, hey, look, this is a constitutional requirement. It's not a constitutional luxury that these folks have an attorney. So it's not like, hey, we'll give you an attorney if we can find one, but if we can't, then tell us what happened that night, right? That's just not how that goes. And so we've created a docket every Tuesday at 11 o'clock. We worked with the jail. We closed down a sentencing docket. So we made sure that the jail could accommodate the hearing time that we wanted. I made a decision. We need to have these hearings every week because we can't have people languish in custody you know, a good example was we had an individual who did not have English as his primary language, and it really puts the court, and I think not in a difficult situation, in a situation where it's almost impossible to communicate with the defendant because the defendant has requested an attorney. And so you're kind of doing a little bit of a workaround on that, saying like, hey, you know, I'm with the government, I'm here to help, so I'm only going to ask you a few questions. That's not a real great space for the court to be in at all. And the district attorney wisely sends down their most experienced people to talk about these hearings, because these hearings have led to release of individuals in custody who aren't represented. The crimes of the accused, either as set forth in a DA's information, which is an initial charging document, or an indictment, are as bad as they get. And so several of these people were released into the community. Let's see, Steve, what was that, about a week ago? In hearings before me. So I've set these either with me as the presiding judge or presiding judge designee. So if I'm out of town, somebody else serves and has the authority of the PJ. And there are a few reasons why that occurred. Number one is, this process needs to be consistent. Doesn't need to be exactly the same for every individual, but it needs to be very similar. So due process for every individual needs to be the same. It needs to be transparent. These need to be hearings that are, in front of the public. So alleged victims, they have constitutional rights as well, so that they can be heard, so that the state has an opportunity to make a record on release or whatever court decision is going to be made at that hearing. And frankly, so the public, either the public if they attend, but really the public attends through news outlets if they care to attend and find these issues newsworthy. That's how the community learns about these issues. So that has been happening. That will continue to happen. Like I said, Rebecca Williams, the responsibility for this work is, well, I would say that it is the duty of the, OPDC, Oregon Public Defense Commission, to supply the attorneys. But I think it was Marion Wright, Edelman said, we are not all equally to blame, but we're all equally responsible. And I spoke with Richard Coe about this, and I said, hey, look, we just, our building is not about, hey, this isn't our job, right? We have a responsibility to do as much as we can to find attorneys. We put out, a blast out to the bar saying, hey, if you're interested in doing this work, we'll help get you qualified and paid through OPDC. Judge Bagley, like I said, I've been traveling since midnight, so Judge Bagley covered court today, and Rep Levy was there too. She's an attorney, she's transactional, so she can't exactly grab a case file, and she's incredibly skilled, but just not at this. And Rep Krepp was there, and I'd sent out an email invite to our state bar president, Rep Krepp, and Rep Levy, and they joined, and Jason picked up a case today for somebody who did not have an attorney, which is, I just think, amazing. So, not just fund it and talk about it, but he was in court in person with Judge Bagley, and, so we're really doing what we can. It is, I have to tell you, in terms of, this situation, we call it a public defense crisis. I view it also as a prosecution crisis, right? Because cases can't move forward, and it's certainly a constitutional crisis. We cannot move forward with individuals who have the right to counsel at these hearings, and we certainly can't, for all kinds of reasons, keep them incarcerated. So these individuals are released on certain conditions. For people who have been held in custody, they're ordered to return to court. And I've allowed them to appear remotely because I just want people to stay connected to the process. So they can appear in person, they can appear, by phone. We set those hearings out 30 days to, hopefully connect them with a lawyer. So, Mr. Gunnels, is there anything that you'd like to add to this, from the state's perspective? Yeah.
Thanks, Your Honor. We were also very fortunate today. We had one lawyer, Angie Lee, who took 2 of these cases, and then 3 other attorneys in private practice who took at least a case. And that prevented anybody from being released today. And that was kind of a little miracle. I was expecting it to be much worse, and it turned out to be a decent day in court. So we didn't have any unfortunate, untimely releases, which is a good thing.
Yeah, the bar has really stepped up. I would say that, I just don't know if there are any more, rabbits locally that we can pull out of the hat in terms of, hitting up the local bar. Local bar has been great, just like all of through these Lipstick meetings and your own, work experience when you're not at these meetings, collaboration gets you really, really far. It's just a force multiplier, and we'll continue to try to find counsel. I know that the Deschutes Defenders is working very hard to, make hires. Cost of living, of course, is challenging, right, for people in the public sector, and certainly for Deschutes Defenders. A lot of people want to come here. It's, what they ask, and what a lot of people ask is, do you have housing, instead of the old, hey, give me the job and I'll go and find housing. And it's like, let me tell you how that's going to work, right? It's really, really tough. And that's just a particular, issue, of course, living in Central Oregon. But I'm happy to field any questions on that. I really wish we were not in this position. I had something else to report. That's the current state of play.
Judge, I had a question, if I may.
Of course.
I was out for the last meeting that, of course, the bench quarterly has with the juvenile department. And I haven't had a chance to catch up with Sonia as to whether this was a conversation at that level. It's not something I've heard about as far as youth, young people not being able to obtain representation, and certainly not, detention is a much different story on the juvenile side. There's really a preponderance of releasing unless there's a huge public safety risk. So there may not be the immediacy or urgency, but is this a problem that you are also seeing on the juvenile side?
I think where we're getting a little skinny, and Angie can, maybe correct me if I'm wrong on this, is dependency. We've had a real increase in dependency work, so and we're thin there. I have not heard about it with juvenile delinquency yet, so hopefully that remains the case. One of the questions that has come up, and posed to me is, like, well, but if this person is charged with, really, really bad, or really, really, really bad, crimes, then, you hold them, right? And well, the answer is no, generally, because, you're talking about, the factors are person's constitutionally entitled to an attorney. They've requested an attorney. They qualify for an attorney, and we don't have one for them. The situation is less acute for somebody who is not in custody when they're making that request. And many people who are charged with crimes are not held in custody pre-trial. But it's a much different situation. Same constitutional analysis, but you have a jail holding somebody who's charged with serious crimes or a serious crime. They don't have an attorney, and you can play these what ifs. What if somebody says that this person talked to them, and an attorney would have told them, hey, don't speak to anybody about this, or they get on the phone and they talk to somebody, or they're hurt or killed inside, heaven forbid, the jail facility, and why weren't they released? And there is some federal guidance on this. Judge McShane at the federal level had issued a decision. His decision was stayed by the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit will issue a decision. We don't have the luxury, it's no criticism of the federal courts, to wait for that decision while people are being held. And so that's why we are moving forward, and in the fashion that we are. I, of course, have read, Judge McShane's decision. It doesn't cover every possible situation of an individual being held in custody. But Judge McShane is a thoughtful person. He's a very skilled jurist, and I believe his, reasoning and his decision is largely sound. And I told individuals too. I said it's also this court's independent feeling that that's the right way to approach this, even though it really can create risk to the community. There's just no question about that. Other questions or thoughts or anything like that? All right, well, as it evolves, I just want to share that. Yes, Commissioner.
Can we talk for a minute about how this interacts with the deflection, the deflection system that's being set up right now? I mean, does opportunities for deflection reduce demand for public defender services to help maybe a little bit with this crisis, this shortage?
It can. So if a deflection program is set up so the individuals are deflected before they come into court, yes. I also think that even to the extent the deflection program requires counsel, I've spoken with Joel Wirtz, who's one of the directors of Deschutes Defenders. He has a plan to bring new lawyers online, graduating 3Ls or certified third-year law students who would be able to take those types of cases. So he really thinks by about Labor Day, he's going to have some new people. One of his folks can start, I believe, in mid-June. So he's trying to work for approval on that. So he said, hey, look, it's not going to be the lower level cases that causes problems. And Commissioner, that actually brings up a really good point. If you look at a simple possession case or theft 3 from Weimar, right? Like, it's not earth-shattering, crime. That's going to get a certain, it's called a MAC. It's basically considered like a point allocation. Let's say that's, 5 points. And then you get something, rape in the first degree or arson in the first degree, and that's going to be 300 points, right? And an attorney in a law firm can absorb a certain amount of MAC either individually or as a firm over a certain amount of time, and then they're capped out. So those low-level offenses, you can handle a lot of those cases, and it doesn't have a huge impact on your MAC. You get a couple of homicides, and that's half a year of your work. So I don't think that will have a big impact, even if there is attorney involvement, and that's based upon what I've been told by the Defense Consortium. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. So,
any other questions? All right. That brings us to, let's see, item 8, any agency updates, other business, anything slightly cheerier than my presentation on unrepresented persons? All right. I had my first kid graduate from college. I had 4 in college this year, so 1 graduated, so only 3 now in college at the same time. So yay. Yeah. All right. Hey, appreciate everyone joining today. I know you're all busy. I hope you have a great week and a nice evening. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.